We're going to continue our series called Decoding Communication, where we are decoding one of the greatest mysteries in the world, and that is the communication problems between a man and a woman, between a husband and a wife in a marriage relationship. Now, in sessions 1 and 2, I showed the difference between men and women and how God has given us a key to unlock our communication problems. Now, in sessions 3 through 5, we were focusing on understanding men and how a wife can energize and motivate her husband by learning to speak the man's language. And now it's going to be the other side of the story. As I said, you know, the last 3 sessions seemed like they were kind of one-sided because they were to the wives for their husbands. Well, now we're going to flip-flop. This is going to be fair and balanced reporting. We're going to flip-flop, and we're going to talk to you men about how you can better understand your wife and how you can communicate with her with a better, in a better way, and be able to really understand what's going on in her heart and her mind when some of the things that happen. And this session, by the way, is called Understanding the Mind of a Woman. In this session, I want to lay the groundwork for the next 2 sessions on how a man can better understand the woman he loves. You know, maybe there's walls of offense that have been built up between you two. Maybe there's barriers of hurt. There's things that have been said. And I just want to say that I'm hoping that I'm talking with good-willed people. I'm not talking about people on selfish, evil intent, people who are abusive and are abusers. But what I'm talking to is you folks out there that have good will towards each other, that you really want to try to make your marriage work. Maybe you're on the rocks, maybe there's things that are going on, and you men are frustrated with your wives, or you wives are frustrated with your husbands, but down inside you really want to make it work. And as Christian men, you know, we need to get back to having a meaningful relationship with our spouses. Now, there's a Bible verse that I just love, and it's found in 1 Peter 3:7. It says, "Likewise, ye husbands, dwell with your wives with understanding." Now, it doesn't say understand your wives. It says dwell with your wives with understanding. Try to understand them and what's happening with them inside, emotionally, and in their minds. And that's what I'm hoping to do in these sessions as we go through and talk to you men about your wives. Remember what I said in the last session about to the wives about men? I said men are providers. In other words, they're hunters. And men are oftentimes the protector. And men are the pursuers. And oftentimes they try to be the fixers. You know, they have this logical way about them. And that the men want to be a prince. And a good-willed man will live by an honor code. Well, on the other hand, now as we're starting to talk to you men about your wives, you need to understand your wife, not all, but the majority of women are nest builders. And you can see this when you go out to try to buy a new house, or you're looking at renting a new flat or apartment or something, that a wife will tend to gravitate towards the kitchen and looking at the living room and looking at the bedrooms, where a man will be oftentimes concerned about whether there's a shop or a garage or something like that. Because see, the woman starts to build her nest. Women find security in being able to be nest builders, and when they have that need provided for them, a home and a place for their children and such, that's really important to them. Women are mothers. I mean, that's pretty logical, but that means that women are multitaskers, and we're going to be talking about this quite a bit through this session and the next 2 sessions about this multitasking ability that mothers have. And women are oftentimes the supporters in the family emotionally. One of my friends was just at my house this past week, and he was telling me about how his daughter that's in college, when she has problems with her car, or when she has problems financially and she needs to figure certain things out, she will call and talk with him. But when she's feeling down, or she's having problems with a teacher, or she's having problems with her boyfriend, she calls and talks to mom, because mom is the emotional supporter. And also, the wife desires down inside to be the princess, not the queen, but the princess. Because see, this relationship between a prince and a princess is very unique. There's this glow there between the prince and the princess that's not there necessarily with the king and the queen. And only just more recently, in the last 15, 20 years, have these things become confused in society. These roles have become confused in society. But generally speaking, down inside, men have these tendencies, and women have these tendencies. Now, I just want to do a review for you guys so that you understand. Remember, I brought out in the sessions for women about how your mind works? Well, this is how a male mind works. The male mind is like a one-track mind. You know, us guys get on one track, and that's the direction we head. We are one-track minded. Or oftentimes they say the mind of a man is like a door to a room. You know, we can compartmentalize, and we do that. You know, it's a unique ability to be able to be focused, you know, working on the computer and be just concentrating on that. And a wife can talk to us and we're just oblivious, you know, because we have a tendency to be in one room at a time. And you know, there's exceptions to the rule. I mean, there are times like, I know if something's really bothering me, I can't sleep at night, I have all these thoughts coming to my mind and I can't control it, and it's really bugging me, you know, there's a problem at work or something. I'm sure you guys can relate to that, but generally speaking, you know, a man is a one-track mind individual. But a woman's mind works quite a bit different. Now, I know that some of you ladies are going to be thinking, hey, you're a guy. What do you know about this subject anyhow? Well, I'll tell you what. It reminds me of one time when I was at a men's retreat, and we were at this lodge up in the mountains, and I walked into the living room, and I was sitting down in this lodge, and there was a coffee table there, and I looked down, and there was this book. And this book was written by a man, and it was about this thick, it was hardbound, and it was called Understanding the Mind of a Woman. Wow, I opened it up and I was like, I really am interested in this because I'd like to understand my wife's mind. There's a lot of times I just don't get it. And I opened it up and yep, this is what was on every single page. Every single page was blank. It kind of reminds me of the story of what happened with the 5th wedding anniversary that this couple were having. The husband went to his wife and knew it was their anniversary. And he said, honey, he said, I've been saving up some money and I want to take you to your favorite restaurant. And then afterwards, I want to go shopping with you and I want to buy you something. If you want to buy a dress or something, I want to do this for our anniversary. And, you know, that's a big step for a guy to say he's willing to go shopping with his wife to go buy a dress or something. And he said, honey, where do you want to go? And she looked at him and said, I don't care. No, honey, where do you want to go? I'd like to take you to whatever restaurant you want. No, I don't care. You choose. No, I want you to choose. No, you go ahead and choose. You want me to choose? Yes, I want you to choose. Well, honey, there's this new Mediterranean restaurant that just opened up down here by the mall. Maybe we could, I don't want to go there. He goes, huh? Didn't you just tell me to choose? I don't want to go there. Are you the same woman I was just talking to a few minutes ago? And there's this frustration that starts coming on. But you guys, you know what's going on, maybe? This is really what your wife is thinking. She's thinking, if you love me as much as I love you, you would know where I want to go. Well, that's not maybe always the case, but it kind of helps you to understand that sometimes as guys, we just don't get a clue, and that sometimes, you know, it's like, you know, do we have to be mind readers? And that's why I want to try to share with you some things about what is going on in the mind of your wife. Now, there's always exceptions to the rules. Now, I've said this through the program, you know, you can't put everybody into a box, but there's always exceptions to the rules. But generally speaking, when you do a survey of like 2,000 to 3,000 women and 70% of those women answer a question a certain way, you know that 70% of women think that way. Now, are you ready for this, guys? This is going to be fascinating. I'm going to give you a peek into the mind of a woman. Now, I showed you a picture of how your mind works. Now I'm going to show you a picture of how your wife's mind works. Watch this. This is your wife's mind. Completely different than the way a guy thinks. All these different windows popping up in her mind, thinking about grandma and grandpa, thinking about her kids, thinking about marriage, thinking about all the different things happening in her life. It's amazing. You see, it's been said that a woman's mind is like a PC computer. They can have many different applications running at the same time, or like having pop-up windows that they have absolutely no control over, that just pop up randomly in their mind. You see, it makes sense though, because God designed them to be multitaskers. And that means that most women are capable of doing more than one thing at one time. In fact, I've been amazed to see how a wife can be involved with different activities going on in the house at the same time, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But here are some interesting statistics that have been shown in the research that's been done. One, most women juggle multiple thoughts and feelings at the same time. Did you know that? Most women juggle multiple thoughts and feelings at the same time. Two, About 50% of all women have stored thoughts or feelings from the past that regularly pop up into active mode, whether they want them to or not. And 3, women seem consistently unable to close these windows as easy as a man can. Wow. Look at these statistics taken from the book For Men Only by Shante and Jeff Fildahan. Now, Jeff and Shante Fildahan gave me permission to use their books and their charts through these presentations. And what they did is they surveyed, for instance, one book For Men Only, over 3,000 women were involved with the research in that one book alone. And so when you have, like I said, 70% of women answering a question a certain way, that you know there's a good chance that over 70% of women think that way about that particular question. Now, this is the statement that was read to the ladies, and they had to agree or disagree by choosing one or the other in the answer. And here was the statement that was read to them. When it comes to controlling your thoughts and emotions, you have no control about having multiple windows open at one time. Well, this is what the statistics show. 79% of the women said they had no control over multiple windows opening in their minds. Think about that. Almost 80% of the women said that they had no control over multiple windows opening in their mind. 21% said they could control the multiple windows. So the majority of women were basically saying that they had these multiple windows open in their mind at the same time. And you know, this explains something to me. It explains to me how, like, my wife can be cooking in the kitchen, she can have a telephone on her shoulder talking to somebody, and then she can be aware of the children in another room, you know, if she's babysitting or when she was younger and she was taking care of our little kids. And then she can even be thinking about an appointment the next morning, you know, that she has to be involved with. These pop-up windows, by the way, this is fascinating. These pop-up windows are a lot more than just dealing with the present. Really, that sometimes these pop-up windows are what I refer to as they get historical. Not hysterical, but historical. Look at this research that was done. Some women say that emotions from the past experiences come to their minds and may be triggered by seemingly nothing. Now look at the stats. 3% of the women said this never happened to them. But 50% of the women said that rarely or once in a while that these pop-up windows would come from the past and they were triggered by seemingly nothing. 39, almost 40% of the women said often or several times a week. So right there we have almost 90% of the women saying that these pop-up windows from the past could just pop up at any time, triggered by seemingly nothing, and that 9% say very often or from day to day. These pop-up windows are going to play in a very important part of this and the next 2 sessions as we start to explain about how a wife interacts with us. You guys are going to be just completely shocked when you hear some of this, and you're going to find out it's going to really help you a lot in understanding why your wife does some of the things that she does. I mean, how many times have you had to thought, why does she do this? I don't understand what she's thinking. Well, there's a good reason for it, and you'll find out that part of it is the way that God has hardwired women. Now, let's review how a male generally communicates, okay? Some of you maybe remember this from the past, one of the past sessions, but this is the typical way of communicating. Men are kind of like a line, you know, in the way that they communicate. It's focused communication to share information. It's very, very directional. In fact, if you think about how, you know, guys talk, they usually are very focused, and they're trying to, you know, talk about something in specific. Now, let's look at a diagram of how many women communicate. Not all, but many women. And you'll see how this directly corresponds with this multitasking pop-up window thing that goes on in their minds. And to me, this is fascinating because this is the way, a typical way, that a female will communicate. It's kind of like a spider web. In fact, it's indirect communication that comes full circle. In other words, that a woman has this ability to, I refer to it as spider webbing, but they have this unique ability to be talking about several different things at the same time, but yet they always, most of the time, bring closure to their conversation by always coming back around and tying everything together. My wife has had a group of ladies over to our house several times. They're in the kitchen talking, and I come in and I'm just listening to them talking, and I'm trying to follow what they're saying, and I just get lost, you know, because they're talking about this, and I say, what about that? And she said, no, that had to do with this over here. Oh, so what are you talking about now? And then finally she said, would you be quiet, just let us talk? And you know, what they'll do is they'll be talking about this and that, and they'll go off in different directions, but oftentimes the stories will all come back around and all the questions will be answered, and they are understanding what's going on, and I'm sitting there just lost. And then, You know, there's a situations where I'll have one of my friends over, my male friends over, and we're talking in the living room, and I'll be saying, hey, do you know Bill, what's his name, name of his wife? It's like my wife's in the kitchen cooking or doing something. She'll say, Mary, and we'll look at each other, and we'll think, how do they do that? How can she hear me all the way from the other room and answer the question? Because God has given women this unique ability of multitasking. So now we can enter into the female matrix of emotions and thoughts. These pop-up windows help us to explain some perplexing things that us guys just simply don't understand about our wives. Have you ever wondered, you guys, now think about this, have you ever wondered why a woman oftentimes will jump topics right in the middle of a conversation? Have you ever had that? And a guy will typically think this way, and this is really, really helpful, because while we're talking with our wife about something, or maybe even a lady at work, that like secretary or something, they'll maybe jump topics right in the middle of the conversation, and we think something like, oh, here we go, she's going off on a tangent. Have you guys ever thought that? Or maybe you might think, well, she's just muddled or confused. You know, why else? You know, we're talking linear, and she's going off in some other direction. Or maybe she's just not paying attention. Have you ever thought that? You know, you're trying to make a point and talking about something, and then she goes off some other direction. And then we take it personal. You know, as guys, we got like macho trying to take it personal, and then we feel like she's not being respectful. And then some guys, I guess, they think that, yeah, all of the above, Jeff, that's what happens for sure. You see, us men have only one window open at a time most of the time, and we're only having one conversation. But your wife or your girlfriend, by comparison, will often have many conversations happening on the same time, and that's why oftentimes while you've been spending your day, all day at work or something, and you're starting to shut down at the end of the day, and you come home and you're just wanting to relax, your wife will come up to you and start unloading. She'll start venting. She'll start talking to you, because all day long she's had all these pop-up windows coming and going in her mind. And so she is wanting to share with you about all these pop-up windows. And I'm going to share in upcoming sessions about venting and the need for a wife to have a husband listen to her so that she can close some of these pop-up windows. You know, all day long she's been multitasking, while all day long most likely you've been running down just one track. Sometimes we can just get lost, like I mentioned about the women talking in the kitchen. I just want to share with you a true example that happened to me just not too long ago. I actually sat down and I wrote this out, and it's pretty close to what happened. And this was a conversation between my wife and I. My wife came to me, and this is what she said. When I was at the store today, I saw Jen. You remember her, don't you? She's the lady who her husband left her a few years ago. He was kind of a womanizer and never really treated her very nice. I can't believe he left her. Anyhow, do you remember how Tricia dated her son a few years ago? He was at the store too, and he had his wife with him. I can't believe they have 2 kids now. One child is almost 8 years old. The reason being is his wife was married before and had a child. I guess her husband was not very faithful and left her. Anyhow, Sue told me that they might have another child on the way very soon. She also said that she was sick all last week with the flu that was going around. Did you remember that we were going to go to Sue's house next Sabbath? I guess Ryan is going to go on a mission trip to China. I hope he's safe there. She told me that her son might be moving back to our town. Now she's talking about Jen's son, again, that was in the grocery store. And she goes on to say, he does not treat her very well because of the influence of her ex-husband. We really need to pray for them. Now, I don't know about you, but that is a typical kind of conversation where, you know, I can come home from work and my wife starts telling me this story, and I am just totally lost. Have you ever had that happen? Well, there's another example. For instance, I'm talking to my wife, and I'll ask her a very simple, directional, male way of thinking question, you know, like, what time is our daughter going to be home from school tonight? Because, you know, I knew my daughter had some extracurricular activities at school and that she was going to be home late. And I expect to get an answer. Being a guy, thinking very linear, I think, well, she's going to be home at 9:30. But this is what my wife says. My wife says she went to a track meeting this afternoon and her bus left around 4 o'clock. She said she might get a ride home with Jenny. And I'm standing there going, huh? I just want to know what time she's going to get home, but she's trying to give me all these details about all the things leading up to the final answer, which sometimes I don't get. So I have to say, well, what time is she going to come home? And she'll say 9:30. And, you know, for a guy that can be very frustrating, but when you start to understand how your wife's mind works, then all of a sudden it all starts to make sense. And one more thing before we end this session, you know, I'm going to kind of flip directions here about, now that we've discussed about how a woman's mind works with the pop-up windows, and about how she communicates in a way that relates to the way that she thinks by going different directions, kind of like indirect communication that always comes around full circle. There's another issue I want to talk about in this session before we go on to the next two sessions, and that is the fact that your wife is very sensitive about what you think about how she looks. And the slightest negative suggestion is taken simply in a nonverbal way as that you don't love her. Now, I told a story, and I'm going to repeat this story, about a guy who goes into a bookstore, and he knew that his wife over the holidays maybe put on a few extra pounds, and she wasn't feeling very good about herself, and she was complaining about that to her husband, you know. And really, when a wife does that, she's looking for affirmation. I mean, if you guys would just go to your wife and say, you know what, honey, I still think you look great. Man, that could mean a lot to your wife. But since he's a sensitive guy and he's at a bookstore, he's looking around and he sees this book called Dieting for the Christian Woman. And so he has the bookstore owner, or the person who's the clerk, wrap the book up, because he's a sensitive guy and he wants to, you know, please his wife. And he has a little red ribbon tied on it, and he takes the book home to his wife. And as he walks into the door and his wife is standing there, and she maybe has her sweatpants on and her hair's not done and she hasn't made herself up that day or anything, and she's standing there and she's like, oh, my husband's brought me a gift. And she opens up the package and she looks at it and she sees Dieting for the Christian Woman. She has basically three thoughts that come to her mind. One is, I do not accept you, I do not approve of you, and I do not love you unless you look like a movie star. And she goes, I can't believe that you'd buy a book like this for me. I can't believe you're so insensitive. And all of a sudden, that crazy cycle we've talked about starts to kick in. You men need to understand that your wife's appearance means a lot to her. Now, sometimes women just give up. They get married, they maybe gain a few pounds, and they're home with the kids, and they just don't try. And ladies, if you're watching this program, I want to encourage you that it also is very important to your husband that you keep yourself up, that you look nice. I know my wife the other morning, she got up and she spent quite a bit of time in the bathroom before just going to the office here at the ministry. And I looked at her and I said, you know what, you look really nice. And you know what happened? She beamed from ear to ear just to hear those words. You look really nice. That is so important. All of us want affirmation. All of us need to be told things that are endearing to us, that affirm us in our relationship with each other. And we're going to talk more about this as we go through the next two sessions. But you see, love is a huge issue for women, just as feeling respect is a huge issue for a man. Now, I don't know about you, but I had 4 kids. I have 4 kids, and 3 were girls and 1 was a boy. And my kids loved to go in and play dress up. And in fact, sometimes the girls would put dresses on my son. He would never want me to tell you this, so don't tell anybody else, okay? But the girls would love to play dress up, and they'd go and put on dresses. They'd copy Bible characters. They would curl their hair. And I remember my daughter coming out, you know, and saying, Daddy, how do I look? How do you like this, you know? And really what she's wanting to hear from her daddy is, you look beautiful. Because down inside, you know, a little girl wants to be beautiful. And then they grow up. And you know what? Down inside every wife, she wants to know that she is beautiful to you. It's really a big issue for your wife emotionally that she knows that you think that she is still attractive after all these years. Look at the statistics. Now, this question was asked several thousand women, among women who are 45 years of age or younger. Do you have a deep need or desire to know that your husband finds you beautiful? And they had to choose yes or no. 77% of the women said yes. I do have a need that even though I do not show it, on the inside, in other words, secretly, they're thinking, I still want to know that he finds me attractive. And 23% of the women said, no, I don't feel that need. I'm happy if my husband finds me attractive, but do not need to be told so. So 77% of the women said yes, it was an important issue for them. Now look at what happens when you take the survey and you drop it down to women who are 35 years or younger. It jumps up to a skyrocketing 84% of the women said this was a big issue for them emotionally, secretly down inside, that they want to know that their husband still finds them attractive. And only 16% of the women felt like that was not really a big issue for them. So husbands, what can you learn from this? You need to give your wife affirmation about her looks. You need to let her know that you love her. Love is an important aspect that men just don't naturally have. You know, we work on the honor system and on the respect system, and women work on the emotional system and on the love system. And we need to enter into their world and understand their world more so that we can empathize with them. And we're going to be talking about that more in the next session. You know, your wife needs affirmation that you still find her attractive. Now, there's some guys that are probably thinking, you know, like, well, I don't really find my wife attractive anymore. You know, why don't you want me to lie to her? No, you can look at her as the wife that you've married, and that you love her for being your wife, and that you do find her attractive because she is your wife. And you'll be surprised on how that can change her appearance. When you start showing special interest to her that she is attractive, that will mean a lot to her, and she'll put forth more effort. Now, the same survey, when you take in all women 45 years of age and older, the statistics kind of level out more, because I guess when you get older, it's not such a big issue. But 60% of the women still felt that it was important, that found them attractive. You know, to me, I think it's wonderful. My wife and I will be walking, holding hands, and traveling someplace together, and we'll see an older couple, maybe in their mid-70s or early 80s, and they're still holding hands, and they're still winking their eyes at each other, and there's this kind of little flirtatious thing going on there. And down inside, even though they've grown old together, they know that they still have that outward attraction to each other and that they love each other. I was recently talking to a gentleman who was visiting here at the ministry, 77 years old, and he was talking about his wife in such an endearing way, about how they flirt with each other and do things together, and their whole life is centered around each other. Now, in the next session, we're going to be talking about the foundation that's been established here. We're going to be talking about speaking the language of love, you men. And this session is going to be breaking down in finer details some of the things that have been brought out in this particular session. And that's going to be a two-part session. We have one called Speaking the Language of Love, Part 1, and Speaking the Language of Love, Part 2. And God bless you until our next session. I know that you will find many of the things shared in that session to be a great benefit to you.